Bienvenue tout le monde. I'm going to call this meeting to order, the 20th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Welcome, Mr. Garrison, joining us today for the first time since in this Parliament. Hope you do well.
Thank you.
I'm welcoming our Minister, Mr. Goodale. Just before I do that, I wanted to inform the committee of a motion that was adopted in the House on Monday, May 30th, and that said that pursuant to Standing Order 81-4B, consideration of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security of all votes related to public safety and the main estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st be extended beyond May 31st, 2016. I believe that was actually extended to June the 16th. So as a result of that motion, we have until June 13th to report back on the main estimates. However, taking into consideration the minister's availability as well as our committee schedule that's been established, we think it would be difficult to have another time to review both the SUPS A and the main estimates. So I am suggesting, and I let the opposition parties both know yesterday and the government side, that we would be considering both the main estimates today as well as SUPS A. Just wanted to get that into the record of why we're doing it. It's a little unusual, but we're following what the Conservative motion said in the House, so we will be able to have the minister deal with both of those. Mr. Goodale, welcome. I'm of course pleased you're able to come. Thank you for joining our committee and bringing officials with you. You'll be introducing your officials in your remarks. I do, however, also want to welcome from the Security Intelligence Review Committee Michael Doucet, the Executive Director, and Madame Stephanie Dion, the Senior Manager of Corporate Services. So welcome joining us today as well. Minister.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you very much. As you have explained, Mr. Chair, we're doing a bit of double duty today with respect to supplementary estimates A and the main estimates, and I hope we can do them justice in the time that's available. In addition to the two people from the review committee that you just introduced, let me introduce the other officials who are around the table. To my right is Paul McKinnon, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Portfolio Affairs and Communications in the Department of Public Safety. And from the RCMP, Dennis Waters, the Chief Financial Administration Officer for the force. He's right on the corner. To my left is the President of the Canada Border Services Agency, Linda Lizotte McPherson, and next to her is Jeff Jaworski, the Acting Director of CSIS, and next to Jeff is Harvey Seneko, the Chairperson of the Parole Board of Canada, and just to the right of Paul is from the Correctional Services of Canada, Liette Dumas-Slater, the Assistant Commissioner, Corporate Services and CFO. Did I get everybody? I did. Good. Il me fait toujours plaisir d'avoir l'occasion.
I am always pleased to have an opportunity to discuss the work performed across my portfolio by the department and agencies entrusted with our public safety and national security, both on the front lines and behind the scenes.
Before we get into the precise detail of the estimates, Mr. Chair, I would just like to take the opportunity of this appearance before this committee to talk about some of the public policy work that has been mainly preoccupying me and my officials over the course of the last little while. The financial implications of these things appear in the various estimates, but I think maybe it's more informative to address the topics by subject matter rather than the specific column in the estimates. And the first thing I want to touch upon is the significant progress that we've been making with the United States on issues that affect our shared border. There's nothing economically probably more important to Canada than the well-being of that long, lucrative, undefended border between Canada and the United States. As I've said on many occasions, there are about 400,000 people that move back and forth across that border every day. There are $2.5 billion worth of trade that moves back and forth across that border every day. It's obviously important that it work well. And it was a topic that was clearly addressed when the Prime Minister was in Washington for the state visit with President Obama. Let me talk for a moment about pre-clearance. This is an initiative that represents a long-standing area of mutual cooperation between our two countries. Pre-clearance strengthens our economic competitiveness by expediting the flow of legitimate travel and trade while ensuring that perimeter security and border integrity are in place. During the March visit, our countries reinforced our intention to support the necessary legislation to put our pre-clearance arrangements on a stronger footing. In the United States, the necessary legislative provisions have been introduced in Congress, and as I have indicated publicly before, the Government of Canada intends to introduce the necessary legislation in the House of Commons before we adjourn for the summer. More importantly, given the many benefits of pre-clearance, Canada and the U.S. have agreed in principle to expand pre-clearance to 4 new Canadian sites: Billy Bishop Airport in Toronto, Jean Lesage Airport in Quebec City, the Montreal train to New York, and the Rocky Mountaineer train in British Columbia. This is a significant opportunity to open new markets and to drive economic growth, and we are working with our American partners to implement the agreement and, more importantly, to expand that business relationship. And it can well go beyond the 4 specific sites that I just mentioned. The second thing that we dealt with in the Washington visit was an announcement that our two countries will also fully implement a system to exchange basic biographic entry and exit information at the land border. By basic biographic information, we're referring to the information that can be found essentially on page 2 of your passport, such as the name, the date of birth, as well as the date and the time and location of departure. Essentially, when you're dealing with the land border, one country's entry information will be the other country's exit information, and vice versa. The collection of exit information would allow the Government of Canada to identify the departure of individuals that may be involved, for example, in Amber Alerts about missing children. At the moment, we don't have that capacity. We will with this new arrangement. It will provide us with a better ability to identify those who may be traveling for the purposes of terrorism or other serious crimes. It would ensure that residency requirements for immigration and citizenship applications have been met, and it would help us collect duties and taxes at the border. I want to emphasize that the Government of Canada takes its obligation to protect the privacy of Canadians very seriously. And to that end, I would note that the Canada Border Services Agency has been actively engaged with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to identify and to mitigate any potential privacy concerns with respect to this entry-exit initiative. And finally, our two countries have agreed to establish a working group on issues related to Canadian and U.S. travelers who experience difficulties with aviation security lists. This includes both the Canadian Secure Air Travel Act and the U.S. Secure Flight Lists. Further to that commitment, on the 10th of May, I announced that we would be forming a Canada-U.S. Redress Working Group, which is now in place. That bilateral working group provides a means for government officials on both sides to communicate more effectively, and to reduce incidents of false positives and thus minimize negative impacts on the traveling public. I am wholly committed to addressing issues experienced by Canadian travelers regarding aviation security lists, while at the same time ensuring that our Passenger Protect program remains a strong and effective security tool for Canada. My department is also working with Transport Canada to develop the regulatory arrangements that will be necessary to the secure air travel regulations. These changes would bring flight manifest screening against the SATA list under government control, which will improve efficiency and address key security and privacy concerns. I know this has been an aggravation to many in the traveling public, including particularly those with young children, and we are determined to make the changes that are necessary to get this job done. Mr. Chair, let me turn now to the topic of national security and the issue of accountability as it relates to that very important topic. As outlined in my mandate letter, I'm working very closely with the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons to establish a National Security Committee of Parliamentarians with access to classified information. This new committee will be mandated to review all government departments and agencies with national security responsibilities. Its goal will be to ensure that our national security architecture is working effectively to keep Canadians safe and at the same time to ensure that it is safeguarding Canadian values, rights, and freedoms. In terms of timelines, we intend to introduce the necessary legislation to establish this new committee as promised during the course of the election last year before the summer recess. One other topic, Mr. Chair, that I would like to deal with just briefly, and that is Fort McMurray. I want to touch on the massive disaster that we have witnessed there over the course of the last month or so, and I know we all celebrate the fact that at least some in that community are now able to move back home and undertake the very large task of trying to rebuild their lives. The Government of Canada continues to support the people of Fort McMurray in the wake of the devastating wildfires. Every agency and department of the Government of Canada has been thoroughly engaged to make sure that all Canadians stand together, and that is certainly true of the department that I represent and the portfolio agencies associated with it. The Government Operations Centre, part of Public Safety Canada, has been leading the response coordination on behalf of the federal government. Using the Federal Emergency Response Plan, the Government Operations Centre brings together provinces, territories, and key federal departments and agencies to assess the risk that fire poses and to the risk not only to Canadians but also to infrastructure and the economy, and to develop and implement the appropriate response plans. We were able to respond quickly, and I'm happy to say completely, to every request that was made to us by the province of Alberta and by the professional emergency management team on the ground at Fort McMurray. As committee members know, to manage the recovery process now going forward, beyond the necessities of immediate response, we are now into that recovery phase. An ad hoc committee of the Government of Canada, committee of the Cabinet of the Government of Canada, has been struck to coordinate federal efforts for the thousands who have been affected. I would also note, of course, the efforts of the local RCMP throughout this entire experience since the very end of April, when the fires began, until the present time when people are beginning to move back into the community. Deputy Commissioner Marianne Ryan, who heads up the division for the entire province of Alberta, and her team throughout Alberta have been absolutely extraordinary in dealing with what needed to be dealt with in that very difficult emergency situation. And now they continue to play a key role in support of the recovery efforts, managing access to affected areas, supporting the restoration of critical services and infrastructure, and the return of residents to the community. I can assure all members of this committee that the Government of Canada is in this effort for the long haul. Sadly, the recovery will not be quick or simple or easy. We all have to be there with patient, consistent, and long-lasting support, because that's just what Canadians do in emergency situations like this. We have each other's back, and that is certainly the case in respect of Fort McMurray. One final note, congratulations to the Red Cross that has worked extraordinarily well to provide services, to raise funds, and to contribute to the solutions that people in Fort McMurray have so desperately needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to respond to questions.
Thank you, Minister. And just before I turn it to the members of the committee, wanted to make sure that you knew that our committee had passed a motion thanking you for your efforts in the Fort McMurray situation, and also the department. So we did pass a motion on that. Sometimes those get passed on, sometimes they don't. So I wanted you to know that we had done that a few weeks ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and extend that congratulations into every corner of the House of Commons. Members of Parliament on all sides have stood in absolute solidarity on this issue in support of Fort McMurray.
Okay, so we begin the 7-minute round. We're going to begin with Ms. Demoff and Mr. Diorio, who are splitting 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, for being here, and all of your officials, and for the fine work that you're doing. We all know that to keep Canada safe and secure, we need to ensure that the men and women who are working as first responders, and I include in that our corrections officers, that they need to be at the top of their game, both physically and mentally. And given that it's PTSD Awareness Month, and I know your mandate letter includes working on this issue, and we here on this committee have been studying operational stress injuries and PTSD. So I just wondered if you could just briefly speak to what your department is doing for the mental wellness of our men and women who are working.
First responders are extraordinary people. And in this portfolio, I have a unique set of opportunities to actually watch them in action, and they are truly remarkable. We call upon them to keep all the rest of us safe, whether that's police officers or firefighters or paramedics or all of those others who are prepared to put themselves in harm's way in order to do their jobs and work for the safety and security of Canadians. Those extraordinary people deserve to know that when they run into difficulty, that their country has their back. And that's why in our platform last year and in my mandate letter, the Prime Minister has laid out a series of things that need to be done to bolster the nation's support for first responders. One of those, I won't go into the detail now, but one of those is the establishment of a public safety officer compensation benefit. When a first responder is sadly killed or seriously injured in the line of duty, this would be a benefit that would provide to his or her family an immediate measure of support. You've referred to another dimension of what the Prime Minister has asked us to do, and that is the creation of a national strategy, a coherent, comprehensive national strategy to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder or OSI, operational stress injuries, among first responders. We have held a series of consultations about what needs to go into that kind of a strategy. drawing on a great many sources of opinion and advice, but most especially first responders themselves in terms of how they see a national strategy and what needs to be in it. The work that this committee did a few weeks ago in studying the question will be very, very helpful in the development of that strategy. What we need to do is to ensure that we have the proper research available and ongoing to fully understand PTSD and OSI in all of its dimensions and implications. We need to assure...
Minister, I'm going to have to cut you short, or Mr. Diorio won't get any time. I do know the importance you put on it. I apologize for interrupting you.
Oui, alors bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre, et bien.
Welcome. On this day of celebrating the Italian Republic, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the committee. Mr. Minister, I want to talk about the pre-clearance agreement. When people leave the Jean Lesage Airport in Quebec, can they expect that the agreement will be operational? When will that occur?
What we agreed to in Washington was a business plan in conjunction with the United States. Understand here that what's required is we need to persuade the Americans that it is good public policy and it is a good, efficient economic arrangement for them to come into our country and establish customs and immigration facilities on the Canadian side of the border, so that people can quickly and efficiently go through that process before they actually cross the border, the whole nature of pre-clearance. So the challenge here is for us to explain to them and to convince them from a business point of view that this is a good thing to do. We know from the experience where we've had pre-clearance already that it really is terrific from the perspective of the Canadian traveler. It just smooths the process so extraordinarily. So the business negotiation needs to go on between the people who run Jean Lesage Airport and the U.S. Border Agency to work out the fine details of how this can be established. But what we did in Washington was open the door for that negotiation to happen.
Et je vous remercie. J'ai un autre sujet qui est celui de la collecte de...
Thank you. I'd also like to talk about collecting exit information. I'm learning, or I learned not long ago, that information wasn't collected, and I have to admit that was interesting to me. I have a concern. When it comes to freedom of movement, that's a right that exists, and we talk about a government authority that's going to collect that information, there are concerns that are raised immediately about privacy. What are the concrete measures that are going to be put in place to protect? I saw what was indicated in the document, but what are the actual measures that are going to be taken to protect people's privacy?
Very briefly, Minister.
Two things in response to that. The information that's involved here is the very basic information that's on page 2 of your passport. In other words, it's not intrusive information. It is the basic, what people call tombstone detail of identification and the date of crossing. So it's not information that you would not, when crossing the border, present to the American authorities because they require that when you enter their country, or vice versa, the other way around. And secondly, we have gone through the details of the process with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner and have sought the advice of the Privacy Commissioner every step of the way in structuring the arrangement to ensure that we could respond to their advice and their questions and satisfy the Privacy Commissioner and his office that this is being handled in a way that is respectful of the privacy of Canadians.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Minister and all other witnesses. Thanks very much for coming here today. And just wanted to comment on Fort McMurray and certainly support the government doing whatever we can to help these people up there. And on behalf of the official opposition, we want to pass on that support. And I think you're right in that all parliamentarians are support them at this tough time.
Yeah, and Ms. Ambrose was very helpful through this whole process.
Very good. Glad to hear that. Just to continue a little bit on Mr. Diorio's question, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Minister, you didn't really answer the question specifically to what is being done to make sure that information doesn't get out. Like, we realize, you know, your name, address may be simple information, but I'd just like to know exactly the process that is being used in as brief a time as you could.
Let me just ask the President of the CBSA to comment.
Thank you, Minister. There are a number of things that we're doing to ensure the privacy is protected. First of all, MOUs in place with the U.S. As the Minister said, there is no derogatory information that will be exchanged. It's simply basic tombstone information. As well, the IT systems have very, very tight security infrastructure built into them. We have been consulting and will continue to consult with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner as well. So, for example, in some earlier pilot and phases we did with foreign nationals, he had recommended that we put some signage up, which we did. So as we get feedback or any recommendations from the Privacy Commissioner, we certainly will take those into consideration. And of course, we're all required to complete a very comprehensive privacy impact assessment, which would be shared with the Privacy Commissioner, and that'll be his opportunity to provide us some feedback. So that would happen once the legislation is in place.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McPherson, could you tell me off the top of your head, if you know, what the cost? There's a cost to everything that we do, and do you know the number offhand, yes or no? Or?
I don't know the numbers.
I'd be interested in getting that if we could, Mr. Chairman.
Can certainly provide that.
Yeah, just to move on.
Mr. Miller, if I could just point out one thing, one sentence though. We've tried to keep this as simple, as efficient as possible, rather than establishing a new whole apparatus for collecting exit information. We simply have this exchange at the border. When you enter the United States, they scan your passport. That's all the information we need. It's that passport information that is then transmitted back to Canada, and that's it. That's the transaction. The entry is the flip side of the coin for the exit. So you don't have to go through a whole new information collection arrangement.
I got it. Thank you. I'm going to run out of time. Refugees and the extra security, you know, getting them here, what have you. I'd like to know 2 or 3 questions on it. One about costs of hotels and probably security related to that, getting them there. And then also a lot of our military bases, and I have a training center in Meaford in my riding that basically were ordered by someone in the government to build facilities that cost in the millions of dollars and basically never got used. So who picks that up? Are the military, like, does that come out of the military budget or does it come out of your budget?
There was an allotment provided by the government for the incremental cost of conducting the refugee project. I'm happy to say, to the best of my knowledge, we came in well within the budget allocation, and did not take anything away from the other activities of any of the departments.
Okay, so I can be assured that there was no extra cost out of the military's budget. Is that true?
Ms. McPherson is just giving me some detail here.
So is it yes or no, Ms. McPherson? Can you answer?
Minister, if I may, the Government of Canada committed $678 million over 6 years, starting in 2015-16. That was to resettle the 25,000 Syrian.
Did any of it come out of the military's budget, is my question.
To my knowledge, this was new funding that the government put in place for all departments. So, for example, in the case of CBSA, we received $23.9 million over 6 years. That was for the 25,000, and then there was additional funding also put in place for all of us for the additional 10,000.
Okay, I don't want to run out of time, but I'd like information, Mr. Chairman, if they get it to me, that basically shows that military or any other department didn't pay for this. So I have those figures. I'd like to
Mr.
move
Miller,
on.
there will be a full accounting of the entire cost of the refugee project involving the various departments that were engaged in that, so that Canadians can know the complete financial story.
Sure. Well, the reason that I'm pursuing this is because the military's already got gutted enough in the last 6 months. I just don't want to make sure they're cut anymore. I'd like to move into...
We could argue that, Mr. Miller, but not today.
Yeah. Pre-clearance costs, it's a good thing, and I'm glad to see you carrying on what the previous government started on this. Do you have any kind of a cost overall, what pre-clearance costs for Canadians? I know it's an investment, but anybody have that figure?
Actually, it's a net gain for the country in terms of the cost compared to the millions of dollars of economic benefit that flow from this. It's more of a gain than a loss. Yeah. And in terms of the new structures that will be put in place, they're essentially on a cost recovery basis. So they're not incremental to the government.
One other very important thing that Ms. Damoff touched on, the PTSD study that we're doing right now, it's very complex, it's widespread, it's not just for first responders, and what my fear is, Mr. Minister, and it would be the same in any government, is that it's so complicated and complex and widespread that in the end nothing gets done or started because nobody knows where to start. And I guess I'd like to hear your comments on where you think we need to go with it. No doubt that I think everybody in this committee is in agreement that we need to deal with the issue, but if we make it too broad, nothing may get done. So maybe you could...
I'm afraid I can't give you time to answer, Minister, but...
I've tried. I hope somebody will come back to it.
We'll get back there. I'm balancing. You'll have about 7.5 minutes, Mr. Dubé, just to make sure I'm balancing the three parties. So, sorry about that.
Ben merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today's the day for proportional committees. Mr. Minister, thank you for being here today with us. It won't surprise you that I want to talk about C-51 and security review and everything that comes with it. When I'm looking at the Security Review Committee, as of next year, as of next spring, on average per year, there's going to be $2.5 million cut from their funding, which represents 11 analyst positions.
Spokesperson from SECU on the subject of these cuts, who said, our ability to maintain a certain level of coverage and our ability to review CSIS activities broadly and as effectively as possible will obviously be hampered. We haven't really been given any explanation. How do you respond to that, given that C-51 and is on the books and the powers are being used by CSIS and SECU is more important than ever?
We are beginning now, Mr. Dubé, probably the largest and most extensive review of Canada's national security architecture that the country has ever undertaken. One new piece that we will be adding, as you know, is the Committee of Parliamentarians to provide a new level of review and scrutiny that has not
Minister,
previously
I don't mean
there.
to interrupt you, but just specifically on the $2.5 million per year to SECU that's being cut, what do you have to say specifically about that?
Gee, I think you have to understand the context, Mr. Dubé. We are examining how all of this apparatus fits together so that we can enhance review and scrutiny, not reduce it. And in the process of doing that, we will examine the financial commitments that need to be made, not just to the new committee of parliamentarians, but to the existing review agencies that are in place now, to make sure that they can do the job that Canadians expect them to do.
Mais si on regarde, vous parlez du comité, puis je comprends que vous...
You were talking about the committee, and I understand that you're starting a review, but we recognize this as a certain degree of urgency. While that study is being conducted, SERC, or rather CSIS, is using the powers that have been granted. I read your testimony before the Senate committee. Will the committee conduct its review after or during? CSIS is intervening. It's my understanding that we have allies with similar committees, and analysis of decisions made by their spy agencies, so to speak, are conducted before and not after they intervene. Will legislation indicate that we should analyze after or before CSIS intervenes?
I'm not sure if I completely get that question, Mr. Dubé, but the legislation with respect to the Committee of Parliamentarians, we hope to have before Parliament for the beginning of the parliamentary process before the end of this month. When Parliament
if I could perhaps rephrase, my understanding is the Five Eyes, who have similar parliamentary committees or what have you, elected officials, they review what happens while it's happening and not simply an after-the-fact review. Am I correct in that statement? Therefore, will our committee that you're putting together with this legislation, will it be reviewing simply after the fact? Because that's already what SERC does, and we need some oversight during when CSIS is actually taking action.
We will lay out in the legislation the exact mandate for the Committee of Parliamentarians. It is intended, and obviously I can't preempt the legislation, Mr. Dubé. You'll understand the parliamentary rules on that one. But this committee will have the authority to examine all of the security intelligence activities of the Government of Canada with two objectives. Number one, are those activities effective in keeping Canadians safe? And number two, are they safeguarding the rights and values and freedoms of Canadians? They will have extraordinary access to classified information. That's why the members of this new committee will be sworn to the top security level and will be able to examine information and activities and operations to ensure that they are meeting the standards that Canadians would want met. In terms of how that is expressed in the legislation, I'll have to leave that to the tabling of the legislation.
Parfait.
But it will accomplish that objective.
On attend ça avec impatience. Je voudrais juste parler...
We're looking forward to that. I don't want to go too far, but I would like an idea of the amendments that you intend to make to C-51. Just as an example from your own party, if the Aboriginal People's Commission asks the government to repeal C-51 because it interferes with the implementation of the Declaration of the United Nations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is that an example of an amendment that could be made? At the NDP, we still believe that that act should be repealed, but is that a change you intend to make to the law to ensure that we respect the rights and freedoms of Canadians?
Particular motion before our recent convention was actually defeated, Mr. Dubé. The platform.
There's preoccupations, nonetheless.
But the platform laid out specifically where we would begin in correcting the defects in C-51. For example, ensuring compliance with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, protecting advocacy and protest, dealing with certain defects in the procedures around the no-fly list, a better definition, a more precise definition of terrorist propaganda, providing for a full review of the legislation after 3 years. Those items were expressly enumerated in the platform. The consultation that I'm about to begin with Canadians is to determine what else beyond that would Canadians want to see included in the changes to our security legislation. What's in the platform is the minimum of what we will do. The consultation will determine what other things beyond that Canadians want to see
And after that
fixed.
consultation, if you decide that, if you realize that the best course of action is to repeal, would you be open to doing that?
We will correct the defects in the law. You understand, C-51 itself, of course, no longer exists. It's embedded in 5 or 6 other different pieces of legislation. Rather than using the defective C-51 as the reference point, we need to have a fresh look at the entire security architecture of the Government of Canada and make sure we get it right without being wedged into an old form that was obviously defective.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today. I note that funding for SERC has been partially expanded, has been increased by $4 million due to the expanded operations of CSIS in part. I also note that CSIS itself is receiving increased funding from the previous year and a $60 million increase from 2014-2015. Now, this reflects the importance of security, but to pick up on my friend's questioning from before, obviously we have to strike a balance. I previously volunteered for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Certainly, Beaches East York, my riding, cares a lot about changing and fixing C-51. And I'd like you to speak a little bit more about how we can best strike that balance, what changes you started down that road, if there are other changes that you see us making, and more importantly, how we intend to engage Canadians in this process and what that engagement process looks like.
Well, thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. There was a moment after the tragedies in October of 2014 when Canadians, I think, were looking forward to a really good discussion, analysis, and debate about our national security architecture. I think people recognized at that time, in the light of those tragedies, that things needed to be improved and strengthened and changed. At the same time, they wanted to make sure that their rights and freedoms were being properly respected and safeguarded, along with the open, generous nature of the country. Unfortunately, that consultation did not happen at that time. I think what legislation was presented, which turned out at that time to be C-51, could have been much improved had an opportunity been given to Canadians of all different views and perspectives to contribute to the process. We're going to provide that opportunity through this consultation that will be beginning almost immediately and continuing through the balance of this year. The pieces of it would involve the cross-border relationship with the United States, which we have discussed, and the legislation that will be coming forward to strengthen our border arrangements, to make those arrangements more secure and to also make them more efficient from an economic point of view. The architecture will include the new Committee of Parliamentarians, which will provide a new level of review and scrutiny that has never been there before. Every other country in the Western world has a vehicle of that kind. We don't. We're going to add that, again, to make sure of two things. Are we being effective in keeping Canadians safe? Are we safeguarding rights and values? Thirdly, we will have a new committee or a new national office on community outreach to try to identify potentially vulnerable and risky situations in advance and have the means and the wherewithal to intervene before tragedies occur. So that's the new Office on Outreach and Counter-Radicalization. We will be beginning an initiative on cybersecurity. Our Canada cyber policy was first established in 2010 Well, a lot has changed since then, and we need to bring that up to date. And then we will make the specific amendments to C-51 that I referred to, and we will ask Canadians this key question. That's the minimum that we will do to make sure that rights and freedoms are properly respected. What else in the architecture do Canadians want to see changed?
And we, certainly one important promise was the inclusion of sunset clause provisions, so we can assess down the road whether the provisions in C-51 were ultimately necessary at the end of the day. And we remain committed to, you remain committed to sunset clause provisions?
What the platform said explicitly was that after 3 years, there would be a complete review of every element of our anti-terrorism legislation. And that is what we will undertake 3 years down the road. And where parts of it are found to be defective or redundant or no longer necessary in the circumstances, then the Parliament at that time would make those changes.
I appreciate that we're currently taking action, or you are currently taking action with respect to the no-fly list. The working group has been struck. When can we expect to see changes, number one? And number two, there are going to be certain changes that are being proposed. Included in those proposed changes, might we see fixing the appeal mechanism, changing the legal standards of review that academics have questioned, and perhaps including special advocates where the Immigration Protection Refugee Act has been changed properly to include them, and C-51 was missing them?
On the inclusion of special advocates, I think that's a very important idea that should be included in this consultation that we're doing over the next 6 months. In terms of the specific commitment in the platform, it zeroed in on that issue of recourse, where someone believes that they are improperly on a no-fly list. The law presently says that they can complain to the minister, and the minister has a certain period of time, 90 days I think it is, to consider the appeal and give an answer. But if the minister doesn't do so within the 90 days, he's deemed to have said no. Well, we would want to put a provision in the law to require the minister to give an answer. It may be yes or it may be no, but don't just deal with the situation by benign neglect.
My final question is with respect to the language that I think is unfortunate, as it lends itself to certainly academics have accused the legislation C-51 of allowing for judicial authorization of acts which would violate charter rights. And you've spoken to this previously, and if you could, for the sake of Canadians, be as clear as possible as to whether this government would allow that to occur.
The wording of that,
in 10 seconds, please.
The wording of that section in the Act, Section 12.1, is obscure. I consider it to be very odd draftsmanship. Whether that was deliberate or accidental, I don't know. But we would want to make it clear that the behavior of our security agencies need to comply with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Hayes.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, and to the officials who are here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. But I think the questions that we have are extremely important as well. I have 3 questions. I'll try to go quickly. One has to do with agricultural producers, the other with radicalization, and the third with the refugee file. Very different matters. The first, as you know, before the Parliament today, we're going to have a lot of agricultural producers present. There is a major issue, dye-filtered milk, coming through our border. We don't seem to have the resources. Maybe we don't have the technology to detect that product. My question is very simple. I don't know if Ms. Lizotte or if the minister could answer. What is in the budget to solve this problem that we have with regard to dye-filtered milk, which is crossing our border? It's a product that's manufactured in the United States, which is not used in their cheese or dairy products, and yet is imported here in Canada.
CBSA has the responsibility of administering the tariffs of Canada. It does not establish the tariffs. The policy decision is essentially taken by the Department of Finance. The short answer to the question is that several departments of the Government of Canada are focused on this issue, understand the concerns of producers, and are working very hard to find a solution that will satisfy the needs of Canadian farmers.
Donc, j'entends ce que vous dites, mais ma question...
I hear what you're saying, but my question is there more money in this budget? With all the details in it that has been set aside for the government to solve this problem. The government says it wants to solve the problem. We hear it in the House when questions are asked. This is a very urgent file. My question is very simple. Is there any new money that is going to be set aside to solve this problem at the border?
Let me ask Ms. Lazat McPherson to describe the situation and whether additional revenue for CBSA is required in these circumstances.
Je veux pas avoir de détails, je veux juste savoir s'il y a de l'argent.
I don't want details. I just want to know if money has been set aside or not, and if so, I'd like to know the amount because I have other questions I need to ask.
My information is that the money has not been allotted in the budget for the simple reason that it's not necessary. If CBSA needs to reassign personnel to deal with a particular issue, they do that internally. It doesn't require an extra allotment from outside.
Parfait, vous avez très bien répondu à ma question.
Great, you answered my question very well. Thank you. My second question is for the Security Review Committee. We know that radicalization is a serious issue. When we look at the budget, we see that $3 million were set aside for that particular file within the overall budget, and I see that $1.9 million has been asked for to take into account the complexity of the committee's work, and $2.2 million for the modernization of offices and equipment. Could I get more details for the $2.2 million? What is it exactly you want to do with that? And $1.9 million, is that new human resources? If so, how many new human resources do you want to hire?
Budget item you're referring to?
It's uncertainty. It would be within the Security Intelligence Review Committee.
Let me ask Mr. Doucette to respond to that.
Great, thank you. To respond to your question on the main estimates for CERC's budget, our relocation and modernization project is roughly $2.1 million, and the funds are being provided to CERC over this year, primarily this year and next. And the reason for that, number one, is we have to change facilities. Our current facility is being decommissioned, therefore we have to move. As well, we are upgrading our IT environment that is out of date and doesn't meet our needs today. So that's what we're referring to as a relocation and modernization project. With respect to the $1.8 million in increased capacity, that is primarily for human resources, to increase our capacity to not only review the service, but to handle complaints against the service.
Parfait. Le 1,9 million représente...
The $1.9 million represents how many human resources that are expected to be hired with that budgetary increase?
So that's 11 people. For the current budget, it is 11 people.
1.9 million for 11 people. Thank you. That was an excellent answer to my question.
Mr. Mendicino.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, good to see you. Thanks for coming this morning. You testified earlier this week before the Senate with respect to the need to strengthen transparency and accountability on the national security file. And when you were there, you identified a gap with respect to review and oversight in the CBSA. You recall giving that testimony?
Yes, indeed.
I want to take this opportunity to try and educate the members of the public and the members of this committee about the distinction between review and oversight. And so what I'd like to do is just talk about a few concepts under each of those two headers, and then I want to hear your ideas about how you draw that distinction in the context of the new parliamentary committee which is going to be created with forthcoming legislation. So review, in my mind, is generally retrospective. It looks backwards in time. It tends to be public, although there are aspects of certain review committees which do consider information which is confidential and sensitive. And review committees do adjudicate external complaints from civilians. So that's the review side. The oversight framework that I believe we're contemplating on a go-forward basis with new legislation could be operational and real-time. It's likely to preside this committee largely in camera, so public will not have, the general rule of thumb will that it will not be accessible to the public. And it may not adjudicate external complaints from civilians. So those are the two sort of conceptual ways that I see review and oversight. The question that I have for you is, take CBSA right now, which has no external review body that looks after that specific branch within the public safety portfolio. How would you keep review and oversight conceptually apart, or do you see that the oversight committee would exist concurrently with some of the pre-existing review committees? How do you see that working?
Each one of the security and intelligence operations of the government has some amount of review apparatus attached to it now. In the case of CBSA, it does not have a mechanism to review specific officer conduct and complaints from the public about that conduct. That's a clear gap in the process that we intend to fill, and we're considering a variety of tools for doing that. It may be a body like the Civilian Review Committee that applies to the RCMP. Others have suggested, well, you shouldn't have a separate review body for each one of these agencies. You should have some kind of a comprehensive review body that can examine all of them together and thereby cross-fertilize the experience, if you will. We're looking at all of the alternatives as to what is the best arrangement. Senator Moore, in the other place, has come up with the idea of an Inspector General in relation to CBSA. That's one of the ideas that will be taken into account. But as we have developed the concept of the overarching committee of parliamentarians, it has become obvious that there are some gaps, like this one in relation to the CBSA, that will need to be filled. And we'll have to think through very carefully the relationship between the existing review bodies or some new configuration of those review bodies and the Committee of Parliamentarians. How does it all fit together? The objective here is not to have 3 or 4 different review bodies all examining the same thing and wasting time and effort and not doing the job that Canadians would expect them to do, but in fact to make sure that they work efficiently together and comprehensively cover the waterfront so there are no gaps in the process, but don't create redundancies where they're all doing the same thing over and over again.
So am I correct in inferring from your answer, which was very helpful, that the best solution to all of this is to have a clear mandate for each of these various bodies, these entities, which are all aimed at enhancing transparency and accountability? So when it comes to creating this new parliamentary committee for oversight, that it spells out in clear language what its mandate is and what the relationship is between that new parliamentary committee is with respect to the other pre-existing review committees which are already there.
The language obviously does need to be clear as to what we expect the Committee of Parliamentarians to do, and when Mr. LeBlanc has his homework done, that legislation will be put before the House in the next short while. In terms of the working relationship between the various organizations, I think that's going to take a little bit of time for the organizations themselves to understand how they work well together. And I'm sure the Committee of Parliamentarians would very much benefit from consultation with Mr. Doucette about the expertise that SERC can bring to the table, and what SERC can do better in these circumstances than the Committee of Parliamentarians, for example, and what the Committee of Parliamentarians could do better than SERC. And I think from my consultation with the review bodies, I think there's a real desire to work together, make this work efficiently. We all understand the bottom line here. Keep Canadians safe and safeguard Canadian rights and freedoms. And let's get the best expertise properly configured to do that.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you for your time today.
Good ending. We have, my apologies to the other members who were hoping to ask questions, or answer them. We have run out of time. We have 20 votes to do, and we could simplify it. I have votes on the main estimates and then votes on the supplementaries. You will see that you have a large sheet, 8 by 14. We could consider all of the first 15 motions together, or we could vote on them individually. I need unanimous consent to vote on the 15 motions together. Do I have you, Mr. Dubé?
Si on vote sur toutes les...
If we vote on all of the motions together, we can still indicate that it's on division, not necessarily have a recorded vote.
Okay, that's true. Okay. So all are in favor that we will consider them together? And you would like it to be a recorded vote or on division?
Just,
on division.
Yes.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion to approve the main estimates for the year ending March 31st, 2017. Do I have you consent for that? All are agreed. It's on division. I never really know what that means, but okay. And then the second thing, shall I report the main estimates ending on March 31st, 2017 to the House? All agreed? Okay. Now we have the voting on the supplementary estimates. Again, there are 3 motions there. Shall they carry, do I have unanimous consent that we can carry them together? It's agreed. All agreed on division? Thank you. Shall I report the supplementary estimates A 2016-2017 to the House? All agreed. Thank you. That ends then our consideration of the main estimates and the supplementary A. A reminder, the meeting on the 7th will not be held, so we'll be cancelling the meeting on the 7th. On the 9th, we'll be considering the report. We'll get the report hopefully before the 9th. I'm looking at the clerk, at the analyst. And I've left 2 meetings then, the 9th and the 14th, for report consideration. Mr. Miller.
Just a question, why is the meeting not happening on the 7th?
Because we have no particular agenda for it. I had left it open for the minister's appearance as well, but he wasn't able to come on the 7th, so he's here. So our current plan is to do the report consideration on the 9th and the 14th, and leave the 16th open for report consideration or an all-party press conference on the release of our report on the 16th. Then Fort McMurray, if we have that last week of June. We may not have meetings. The problem is starting something new on one meeting.
Okay.
It's sort of an orphaned meeting.
Okay, I thought we were having more witnesses on the PTSD.
No, it's now at report writing.
Okay.
Mr. Dubé.
Mais la rencontre qui était prévue...
But the meeting for Fort McMurray, wasn't it that day? What date is that going to be?
Hopefully on the 7th as well. I tried to put it on the 7th, but no officials were available on the 7th or the 14th. I tried to juggle them, but we couldn't get officials the 7th. The earliest date we could get was the 21st. That was our problem. So it's an orphan meeting. I would suggest you use it wisely at the time. All right. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.